Hello, and welcome to my horror story. Across history, there have been many counts of paranormal activity reported, and usually, these people who report this paranormal activity are labeled as crazy, insane, or as someone who just wants attention. And I suppose that after I share my story today, I'll be labeled the same way. But I don't care, because my desire to get this off of my chest is far stronger than my fear of alienation will ever be. About a year ago, there was a dumb idiot who made this video right here. In the video, the dumb idiot that I had previously mentioned goes over a bunch of different spirits and how you can banish or capture them. Towards the end of the video, he describes an encounter he had with a very rare and powerful type of spirit. He looked up at God, he smiled, and he said, I then went to the restroom because I wanted to wash my hands, and then, from one of the stalls, I heard, out from behind the corner came this dark, well, I guess not really dark. When I heard what this guy had to say, it sent chills down my spine, because everything he described was something I had experienced 10 years ago, in my very own home. The following story I tell is my recount of what happened. Back in late 2011, I was very excited because I had just purchased a mansion. I was able to buy this mansion because, cool little fun fact about me, I am one of the wealthiest beings to ever walk this planet, and I acquired all of that money through totally normal and not illegal means. I would never sell heroin to children on a playground. That's just not something I'd do. The mansion was up in the mountains where the altitude was high enough to snow. I liked it up there because, admittedly, I can be pretty reclusive at times, and because, snow. I just like snow. Snow can be pretty cool. Outside the mansion, there were trees that pressed up against the house from all sides, except for the front. In the front yard, I had a driveway that led to the garage and a few sidewalks that led to the front door. The sidewalks and driveway were accompanied by a few hedges in front of the house, and there was also one lone tree out in the middle of the front yard. So the outside was cool and all, but other people thought that as well, and that led to a bunch of miscreant teenagers just installing a bunch of strobe lights in my front yard. For some reason, those ruffians were so enchanted by my front lawn that they just decided, hey, we're gonna start throwing raves on this guy's front yard. And that's exactly what they did. They threw raves at random nights, and I didn't know how to stop them. I did know where the button to start all of the strobe lights were, but for some reason I could just never find any of the lights themselves, so I couldn't take any of them down. But other than that, I actually really enjoyed living in the mansion. Inside, I would play video games on the big giant theater TV screen that I had. I'd also enjoy swimming in the indoor pool. I also enjoyed sitting on the balcony and dramatically watching the snow fall as if I was about to break out into tears. I wasn't, but it made me feel dramatic. For about a month, all was well, and I lived up there in the mansion with my two dogs named Smeeber and Beaver. And even though I was enjoying things now, I had no idea what was about to happen to me. One day my parents came over and were going to spend the night with me. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else, so I decided to pass the time by playing Super Mario 64. And that's when things started getting weird. In Super Mario 64, whenever you triple jump, Mario says the following soundbite. Yahoo! But that morning, when I opened Super Mario 64 and did a triple jump, instead of saying his normal Yahoo, Mario went Yahoo! As mortified as I was, I kept playing, but then Mario stopped moving. I could no longer control him, and he turned around and looked at the camera before saying, penis. I was petrified, and then turned off my Nintendo 64. I had no idea why Mario would say such a terrible word, but then things got even worse. I heard my mom come stomping down the hallway, and then she kicked down my door and started yelling. She said, "Do you pesky young boy, are you sitting in here saying the penis word?" And I looked at her and I said, "No, Mom, it was Mario." I would never say a word like that, but she didn't believe me. She then grabbed me by the ear and dragged me over to the fireplace, where she then took the fire poker and began poking me as punishment. That day when my mom drove away, alongside my dad who had no idea of what had occurred, she had a look of disgust and anger on her face. So now that I had been cast into a state of confusion, I went back to my Nintendo 64 and decided I would investigate a bit more. But this time, I brought Smeeber and Beaver with me. Smeeber was a big giant pit bull who was afraid of nothing and would stop at nothing to protect me. Beaver was a pug, so he wasn't big and he was very skittish, but he still liked to sit in my lap, which helped to keep me calm. Together we sat in front of the TV, but when we booted up Super Mario 64, nothing was wrong. It was just the normal game all over again. I was in a very deep state of confusion, and I wasn't sure what to do from here, but then Smeeber was agitated by something. He looked out the door and got up and started barking. As he ran out the door, I chased after him, and Beaver promptly followed. The two of us had found Smeeber staring out the balcony door. I then figured, you know what? Why don't the three of us just go out onto the balcony and I can clear my head? It was night out, but I could still see into my front yard because I have these spotlights installed. Mind you, these aren't like spotlights. These aren't the spotlights that the teenagers installed for their pesky raves. These are just things that I installed myself. While I was sitting there collecting my thoughts, I looked out at that lone tree I had mentioned earlier. On this lone tree, about 20 feet up off the ground, there was a tree branch that jutted straight out. It looked like something that you could stand on pretty easily, but again, it's like 20 feet off the ground. There's no way you're gonna get onto that thing unless you have like a ladder or something. Or at least, that's what I thought. Tonight I looked up at this tree branch and I saw a figure wearing a suit standing on that tree branch. It had a hat pulled over its eyes so I couldn't see its face, and it was just standing there, menacingly. The figure noticed that I had finally seen it, and then it started chanting or doing something. I'm not sure what it was doing, but it started leaning backwards in a manner that defied all physics. At first it was scary, because I mean, if you looked out into your front yard and you saw a man in a suit defying nature in a tree, I'm pretty sure you'd be afraid as well. So yeah, it was scary at first, but then the branch it was standing on broke and it fell to the ground with a scream, so it stopped chanting. And I know that you're probably sitting there thinking, wow, this is just a bunch of bullcrap. I'm about to click off of this video because I don't believe any of it. Well, I know this probably won't convince you because you're stupid, but I do have this audio recording that some of the security cameras picked up. That just goes to show that everyone, including supernatural beings, can make mistakes, Deborah. But the joke's on you. You don't even know what you're missing, Deborah. I can't remember the notes. But anyways, as the being was falling from the tree, its hat fell off of its head, which gave me a clear look at its face. Looking at this creature's face, it was clear as day to me. This was no human. This was not just some common thief, some smooth criminal that had come to steal my vast wealth. The being that was currently standing in my yard, well, the being that was currently laying in my yard was one that had ideologies of destruction, death, and among other things. The being regained his composure, put his hat back on, and then got up off the ground. The being then grabbed the brim of his hat with his index finger and his thumb. He pulled it further over his eyes and turned around. The being, with his back now turned to the house, began approaching us. He wasn't even walking forward, he wasn't even picking up his feet as a matter of fact, and yet he was still approaching the mansion at very high speeds. Smeeber began barking and Beaver began whimpering and desperately trying to find a way back into the mansion. I quickly threw open the sliding door. Beaver ran inside, but I had to practically drag Smeeber inside. I then slammed the door shut and locked it, but then what I heard next? Well, the cameras also picked the audio from this up as well, so why don't you listen to it for yourself? Once I heard these sounds, I knew that the being was now on my roof. He also destroyed my satellite dish, but that was the least of my concerns at the time. I then went around and as quickly as I could, I locked all of the doors and all of the windows that the mansion had. The entire time, all I could hear was Smeeber barking, Beaver having the zoomies, and feet being dragged across my roof. After I had finished locking everything up, I then quickly grabbed Smeeber and Beaver, and then I huddled up in bed with them. The entire time we were huddled up in bed, the sound of feet dragging across my roof was constant. But then eventually, the sound of feet dragging stopped, and it was traded in for a much worse sound. The being had just jumped into my chimney and was now in my house. Knowing that there was probably not going to be another option, I grabbed my rifle, I tied Smeeber to my waist, and then I put Beaver in one of those little things that moms can put their children in. I'm not sure what they're called. Whatever the case, now that I was suited up, I was ready to go defend my home. Upon getting to the fireplace, the ash had left footprints from the being. The footprints very quickly turned backwards before turning into two straight lines that led to the kitchen. I very slowly followed the footprints, or I guess you would call them foot lines, into the kitchen. The entire time Smeeber was pulling on the leash. The lines faded in the middle of the kitchen. The room was quiet, but then one of the burners flared up, and very cautiously I approached it. On top of the burner was a pot filled with water and Cheerios. I'm not sure what this hate crime was supposed to mean, but I knew this being was not messing around. I then heard a very loud splash coming from the pool room, so that's where I went next. For some reason, at the bottom of the pool, there was a chandelier. I'm not sure how it got down there because I don't have a chandelier anywhere in my house, but I mean, it was down there. Just then, Smeeber became agitated by something, and he tugged on the leash so hard that I actually fell over. Upon hitting the ground, Smeeber's leash broke and Beaver fell out of the little baby thing that I had strapped him into. Smeeber then ran off to try and fight, and Beaver ran off to try and hide. I had gotten Smeeber and Beaver when they were both puppies, and so, I really loved them. And I really didn't want them running around the house while there was some omniscient creature wearing a suit running around, because that's just not safe. So, understandably, I was worried about them, So I promptly regained my composure and I began searching for them. After 30 minutes of searching, I hadn't found anything. Not a bark, not a vase that was turned over. There was nothing. But then I walked by the laundry room, and little did I realize the night was about to hit its climax. Smeeber came running out of the laundry room while whimpering. Now, I had, like I said before, I had had Smeeber and Beaver since they were puppies, and I honestly can't recall a single time that I have heard Smeeber whimpering or just being scared like that. I then looked into the laundry room, and that's where I saw it. Beaver was in the laundry room, and he was standing on his hind legs with his back to me. He wasn't wobbling, he wasn't off balance. He was just standing there, almost as if he was a human. But he wasn't, he's a little tiny pug. Sensing that something was wrong, I very cautiously approached Beaver, but then, I don't even know what happened. I blinked, and then, all I felt was pain throughout my entire body. Ignoring the pain that was surging through my body, I realized that there was now a hole where the laundry room wall used to be. I was now in the hallway outside of the laundry room, and as the dust settled, I saw Beaver. He was now facing towards me. Beaver was now making noises that were weird, even for pug standards, and as soon as I saw the look in his eyes, I knew why. Beaver had been possessed, and if it wasn't the look in his eyes that told me that, it was the fact that he used his little tiny paw to punch a washing machine and send it flying across the laundry room. In a panic, I then got up and ran. I looked back only to see Beaver in hot pursuit of me. So I turned back around and did my best to ignore the pitter-patter of his little feet. I turned to enter the kitchen, but due to the fact that I had to turn, it slowed down my momentum, which allowed for Beaver to catch up to me. He punched me and sent me flying into the wall, but as I fell back down to the ground, I accidentally hit the light switch on my way down, which turned the lights off. Wanting to set my sights back on Beaver, I quickly turned the light back on. Doing this seemed to cause the being some level of discomfort because it flinched and it almost sounded in pain. So I flickered the lights a bit more and it became very apparent that whatever had taken over my dear companion's mind really did not like it. I then knew what to do. I was going to drive the being out of Beaver's mind. I had mentioned before that there were a bunch of miscreant teenagers that wouldn't stop throwing parties on my front lawn, and once I had flickered these lights and realized what this being's weakness was, I remembered the strobe lights that the teenagers had installed. I never took them down because I could never find them, and I just so happened to know where the switch to start them was. With a newly invigorated flame, I ran outside, and Beaver promptly followed. I then ran over to the switch, and seeing that Beaver was already in the center of the yard, I turned them on. The blinding lights had fired up and were now beating down and converging on the being that had taken over Beaver's mind. The being, no, the demon that had taken over Beaver's mind was now screaming, and I thought that would be the end of it, but it wasn't. Gradually, it stopped screaming, and eventually, it started laughing, and then it spoke to me. It looked up at me, and it said, "So long as I have control of your dog, I will feel pain, yes, but I will not die. All you are doing is hurting your dog. I will eventually crawl my way out of this, and I will make millions suffer." And as much as I hate to admit it, he was telling the truth. All I was doing was hurting Beaver, and eventually the lights would either stop or he'd be able to crawl his way out of it. And once he does, I wouldn't be the only one to suffer. Thousands, millions, just an unbearable amount of people would have to suffer if he wasn't stopped right here. So with a heavy heart, I knew what I had to do. Every single flash of the lights were illuminating the snowfall, which was making it harder to see Beaver, so I approached him. And then I drew my rifle. I stared down the barrel at 7 years of memories, and while the demon was right about a lot of things, it was wrong about one thing. Beaver was not a dog. He was my friend. One of my best friends. So with shaky hands, I took my shot. A grotesque figure was then projected out of Beaver's body, and it quickly became engulfed in flames. It screamed, a horrible, ear-piercing scream, but what was harder to listen to was the sound of Beaver's whimpering fading to nothing. Anyways, that's all I have for now. So, thank you for listening to my ghost story. I really appreciate it. I am so glad that you came here. I'm so happy right now that you are here. And I appreciate you watching so much. And tune in next time when I teach that pesky gerbil of yours how to properly trick or treat. Happy Halloween, and good night.